Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you're listening to this. My name is Yuri Castro, and I'm very happy to be here today with you and with my co host for the Seeds of Knowledge series, Marcia Trajano. Marcia, how are you doing?
Hi, everyone. I'm good, doing really well. Thank you so much, Yuri.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing yet another very interesting topic with us. And just if you're not aware of this series, the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living releases one of these series, these talks, every first and third Sunday of each month. And today, my dear co host Marcia is going to be talking about this very, very interesting topic. And I'm here. I'm interesting to hear more about grief, more about solitude, how we can combine all those things, and what's the spiritist message will be. So thank you so much, Marcia. The floor is yours. I'll come back once you're done. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. See you soon. Hi, everyone. And I have this just visuals for all of us just to have a sense of what we're talking about. But and let me better now. And just wanted to say, as echo perhaps what Yuri said. To me, this is not only a very important topic, but a very personal one because I am, like many of us today, are going through grief and all the resulting difficult, sad, quiet, lonely path that grief leads. But our topic today is grief, loneliness, and solitude. But most important, how they're paths for our inner healing. And I want to say, you know, the most important message here is for all of us to understand that pain can become a teacher, right? This as we're disciples of such teacher, we should learn, we should grow, but should not think of it as a prison. And I know many of us, when we go to school, depending on our age and maturity levels, we go like, no, I have to go to school. I want today to be a holiday. I want today to be a vacation, etc. And we often look at those educational institutions and those educational opportunities of prison. That's what we're here to try to see is to shift our mindset to understand those moments of pain, especially through grief, can become that teacher, a good, welcome teacher. And I just wanted to also share with everyone that this topic is actually found in many different books in the Spiritist literature. And I especially find that Joanna DeAngelis, in her psychology collection, as we can think, is like 16 books that she wrote as a Spiritist author in close collaboration with Divaldo Pereira Franco. But Joanna brings that voice that I hear as this beautiful invitation for all of us to really shift our mindset, but most important, to transform our emotional suffering into that spiritual maturity. I would be wrong if I did not share. Let me make this larger here. References. There are many amazing books. For me, I found very interesting materials, and I share with you because you may be able to also seek those if you are going through grief yourself. But After Death by Leon Denis, Jesus in Life by Joanna De Angelis, The Integral Human Being. Andre Luis also has in Missionaries of Light, in many other books, there's some messages about the topic. Of course, back to to Joana de Angelis and Divaldo Pereira Franco, we have a really interesting. Those are all small books, by the way. If you have not been exposed to Joana de Angelis psychology series, but Wake Up and Be Happy, delicious little book that talks about death, that talks about grieving, that talks about loneliness. But also we find in the work of Allan Kardec, the Gospel according to Spiritism, the Spirit's book, and I did not write it down here, but Heaven and Hell, those are really seminal books that will help us go through what we're going through. And of course, Leon Denis, love Leon Denis. He wrote The Problem of Life and Destiny, that goes right there in the discussion of pain. I also have some inspirations from an American author, very known by here in the US, but maybe you don't know her, Brene Brown, and you can reach out to some of her discussions, videos, books, etc., in the website brenebrown.com, and an interesting little project in that's called Project Unlonely. Love the name, and it is all about this mission of art and healing. And you can also find more about it in their site, artandhealing.org. But as I said, it is good to have all of us here together so we can break down the problem of pain into perhaps smaller bits. For me, some of the questions that come to mind are, I don't know. What are some social aspects about the grieving process itself? How does it change depending on those cultural and social, the cultural elements with social expectations? Um, from a physical and psychological perspective, if we're talking about grieving and loneliness, what are, if any, health impacts to just falling in a trap of the prison of loneliness? It cannot, should not be a prison, but if we fall into that, are there any health impacts to our well-being? Another aspect, because you see in the title of our discussion today, we talked about solitude. What is solitude? Can we define it? And also, if we talk about that emotional landscape, what does it look like when we go from loneliness into that state of solitude? But that's what I see us talking today. Those are the questions that came to my mind, and I appreciate Yuri the opportunity to be here and to talk about it. But as you can see in the slide, this is a quote from Leon Denis. In the silence of solitude, the soul hears the divine voice that guides us. It and sustains it. It is in these quiet moments that the soul can. So I love that that quote. Of course, he's a French author from the 19th century, and whenever I read Leon Denis, I I come out as if I'm reading poetry. It's so beautiful, so moving. But we're going to talk a little bit, and it's the majority of our time together is if we talk about grief as an educational experience, right? So not school as a prison, but I don't know, that school, that Ivy League, that you did everything to be part of it, because in our reincarnation, in through our reincarnatory planning, we say, I want to do this. So that's it. That's our education experience. And one aspect that we are all going to go through is grieving. And I'm specifically talking here about grieving from a loss of a loved one, but we can talk more, not today, but at a later time, about grieving the loss of your identity, of a job, of, I don't know, many, many different layers of loss. But as I said before, it is important. to frame our discussion today with that pain that comes when a loved one moves on to the spiritual, back to the spiritual home, to the spiritual dimension. And we can see that in those moments of pain, grief isn't only um, an inner emotional process. Interesting enough, because it feels like it is, but it is a process, it's an experience that is deeply social. What are we talking about? Well, when we lose that loved one, and we're talking about especially those deep bonds that we have with one person or more, our parents, our children, our siblings, maybe our spouse, etc., right? In the loss of the perceived loss of that loved one, socially speaking, it is really a strong, deep reshaping of how we relate to others, how we relate to the roles. Let's pretend that's not my case here, but for those, say, if I were a mother that lost a child, how does it relate? Uh, to my role as a mother, how do I refocus or shift my mind into that role that for whatever many years or hours I was, right? And how it also shifts as it is inserted in a the context of a community, right? So I think, right, there are changes in those social roles from, say, loving our sense of self when and if we lose our sense of identity. Again, we talked about many different roles: spouse, child, caregiver, sibling. And it moves on to also understand from that aspect to to what happens to the immediacy of the day-to-day tasks, right? And think about it, and I know someone very close to me that very young had just got married, and they are going say goodnight, go to bed, and in her early 20s, this young woman wakes up and her husband has passed from a heart attack, a sudden heart attack. Her world just fell apart. All their plans as a young couple, all of it. So you can see how grieving in those aspects goes beyond the acceptance to what about me, what I am, that sense of unfairness, that sense of abandonment, right? And even going back to sleep in the same bed or go to the same house or apartment, it shifts and it kind of deconstructs, forces you to deconstruct your sense of self, right? And also beyond the loss and the how I identify myself, but there are other aspects. The role that I take in, say, in a family. Am I the provider, and the those who are provided are no longer there, or did I lose a provider? Am I the nurturer, and I no longer have those who are being nurtured, or I don't know, am I that emotional anchor? There's so many different roles that intentionally or not that we have to shift once we go through grief with that loss of the loved one. Further, the loss of someone through death, right, can also bring many different aspects to our well-being, such as insecurity. my my north, my south, my the ground that I walk are no longer there. I am unsure. There's also an overload of everything else that I have to adapt. And so there is often a sense of disorientation that we all go through, right? And as we are grieving, something funny happens, and I say, as I mentioned, it's easy to read, it's easy to learn about it, but I am going through this. It's very recent loss of someone very, very close to me, and we lose the ability to talk about it, to communicate or adequately express all of this turmoil, many layers of feelings and emotions. And that, in many cases, may lead to avoidance, right? From one I cannot talk about, or I am harping on that sadness, right? Or people around you, your social network, just become uncomfortable or even afraid of reaching out or saying the wrong thing. That silence can unintentionally increase the sense of isolation. Emmanuel reminds us that the value of quiet, compassionate presence is quite important. And he invites us, all of us, no matter what is your faith, no matter what is your belief system, let's seek silence. Let's seek silent prayers. Let's seek loving thoughts. Let's seek fraternal listening, fraternal communicating, speaking. And he brings those very powerful tools for our healing when we're going through that process. That process and quite inevitable social withdrawal or isolation. It is so common during those moments of grief. Why is that? Well, grief just consumes our emotional energy, and a minimum of social interaction may feel overwhelming, right? Sometimes you just want to be present, sometimes you just want to cry. It is that type of impact. And so, as I'm grieving, withdrawal can be um, protective mechanism, if you will, a response that is it comes as a protection, a shield, if you will. And many will say, "Oh, you are, say, going through depression and you need to seek help." Well, you may need to seek help. You may not. So let's think about what we're going through as we break down those items, those steps. But that withdrawal may be all you need because your energy just diminished and you don't have much extra to interact. And some of us going through grief will pull away, right? And it's okay when we are overwhelmed, when we are insecure, when we are exhausted. It's okay to pull away. And the problem with that silence and withdrawal and sense of isolation is that with time, those of us that are there as our social network, those of us who care for us, who keep trying, those of us who keep trying to come and be there and embrace us, sometimes they just stop asking for how can I help, right? And those who could have provided support just stop altogether. So prolonged isolation, it's important for us to see as isolation is a coping mechanism, that withdrawal in isolation, but prolonged periods of isolation can indeed risk increase the risk of depression, right? So it is in with Andre Luis that we see in his book, especially Missionaries of Light. He highlights how our emotional state, um, they influence our spiritual companionship. What am I talking about? Well, because it's important for us to understand that. So, Andrea Louise cautions us that we need to be aware. And indeed, isolation and depression may attract mental and spiritual imbalance. And especially, Andrea Louise says, if that isolation, that sadness is filled with despair, right? So it is important for us to see the two sides of the coin, or the balance, if you will. That on one hand, it is good to miss a loved one. It is good to have those mental images, recollections. It is remembering, and with the sense of gratitude that we feel the link despite no longer have the person physically with us. But on the other hand, we if we are desperate in our moments of grief, we can become depressed, and we can open the door for spiritual imbalance that could lead indeed to an obsession. So, if we go back to social support, our family members, our friends, or, and I'm going to do air quote here, but anyone, members of our tribe, in air quote, it is, they are so important at this time of loss, of grieving. And I would say probably those social support mechanism are the strongest protective factors while we are grieving. Being heard without judgment will help our emotional regulation. So, Andrea Louise, we hear you, and we are seeking the social support of our members of our tribe, right? And um, if you think in terms of having that social support, also restore something that is very important, because when we and I would do air quotes every time I say lose, because we don't lose, right? We life continues, but in that moment of physical loss, when a loved one goes and returns to our spiritual home, we we are so going through so much that we ourselves may lose a sense of belonging, right? And that social support network will help us restore meaning, and even help us through the pain, will help us normalize and understand it's okay. It's okay. We're here in this together, right? But for all of us who feel abandoned, Spiritism tells us something else, and I really need to share this with all of us, which is that whenever we feel lonely and uh, going through grief and isolated, and we feel no longer part of the group, we feel abandoned, let us consider service. Yeah, I'm saying this right. Like, look at the forms of charity, fraternity, and solidarity. Those are indeed therapeutic opportunities for our own pain. Helping others in pain helps us organize our own suffering. It is amazing. And it is in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 13, that we are reminded about the charity. And of course, one of the biggest lessons for me, I love it, is when we are reminded from Jesus, let not your left hand know what your right hand is doing, right? Charity for charity's sake, and shifting the focus of our pain in us, in ourselves, to the other. And I mentioned one of the questions when I started talking or thinking about this topic, that there is a social aspect to grieving, right? And in society, indeed, depending on where you are from or where you're living and are inserted in the society, may actually impose unrealistic expectation about this quiet period. And it's almost, and Kenneth Doka brought this concept here, the disenfranchised grief. What was he talking about? Simply put, he was talking about a grief that is socially unrecognized, right? And so we may say, okay, Marcia, it's been a month, chop chop, get up. Or you can say, Marcia, how you feeling today? Is it getting any better? Right? Those are very different ways to approach those who are going through grief. And Spiritism, actually, if you go to the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 10, right, it really gives us the tools and the encouragement to provide compassionate patience to all of those who are suffering, grief or other types of causes of the suffering, right? And Spiritism and the gospel specifically comes to our rescue, if you will, teaching us that every spirit, and this is important to me, right? Every spirit evolves at a different pace, at a different rhythm. We are all imperfect spirits, and we are all evolving, and our progress will happen not with pressure or even comparison. It is what it is. It's the pace that, spiritually speaking, I need to go through. So, from that perspective, I invite all of us, whenever we look around the aisle and we see somebody who is suffering, let's practice tolerance toward ourselves and those who are also suffering. Oh, there's a lot on grief, right? I said this is going to be the bulk of our topic today. But one aspect for us to remember is that in the middle of our moments of silence, moments of sadness, moments of isolation, um, relationships do change as well, right? And the plus side of this is that some relationships deepen through a shared sense of vulnerability. Others fade maybe due to discomfort, impatience, lack of empathy, or simply due to their coping mechanisms, right? And finally, from that perspective, we need to be aware that new bonds may form with different people who are perhaps experiencing similar losses than we are. So, from that perspective, grief is not only about missing someone deeply, it's about relearning how to live among others when they're not there, right? I am inserted and I don't see you, but I can live with you. So, accepting that grief and loneliness are natural aspects of existence, I would say, is the very first step to embracing those positive aspects of solitude, those aspects that, in a nutshell, will lead to personal growth and our mental well being. right? As we recap this discussion to finalize, from a psychological perspective, grief is seen as a rupture in our identity, and social disorganization is expected while our psyche reorganizes itself. During this period, we need time and we need support because we are redefining who we are in this new cycle of our lives. From a spiritist perspective, we learn that relationships are spiritual bonds. They're not just, I don't know, a social contract. So while my role will shift while I in this incarnation on earth, my affective bond with whomever will remain. So, from that perspective, immortality gives grief a new existential framework. Death changes the dimension of our relationships, not love itself. And faith strengthens resilience and social reinsertion. But I had other questions about this topic, and we talked a little bit about loneliness, right? And when we talk about that moment when the soul feels empty, it's important for us to understand that first and foremost, you know, this is a universal human experience, just like I am thirsty, right? Let me drink my sip of water. Or I am hungry. Uh, it's part of being human in this incarnation. But what is it though, right? Loneliness. Well, if we can simplify it, it is just a natural feeling, a almost a signal that something is missing. There's a lack of something, like a gap. And from that perspective, in this case, the gap is that human connection, right? And loneliness, despite the fact that we are grieving or not, we're just going to talk about loneliness itself. We all experience this. There will always be a moment that will feel that. But interesting enough, some of us are more susceptible to acute or even chronic loneliness. And we just important for us to see when we say that, who are the most vulnerable? Well, the elderly, or even college students, right? Or those that are at risk or marginalized communities, the unhoused, for example, those may not have the possibility of having those social interactions or those connections as strongly as the rest of us. And I told you that I was reading quite interesting the project Unloneliness, right? And it's a project, real quickly, that was created in about 10 years ago in the US, and it highlights actually the health risks associated with loneliness and or social isolation, right? And it's interesting for us to think about it because some of the data says that in the US particularly, more than one third of all American adults and right are facing challenging life circumstances like grief, right? Like the loss of loved one, but they're also suffering chronic or catastrophic illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, mental illness, and those are especially individuals especially vulnerable to feeling that chronic loneliness. And from that perspective, loneliness has some negative effects on our mental health. And they, as I mentioned before, can worsen our depression or even anxiety, mood disorders, cognitive decline, and on our physical health, right? So some of the things that that project has brought, sorry, to the surface are the fact that higher rates of cardiovascular impairment, chronic pain, or even fatigue are seen for those who are experiencing loneliness. And if you think about it, um, young adults, teenagers, or those at the very end of the spectrum from my age perspective, the older adults, they are at risk. And from a statistical perspective, there is a growing incidence of not only depression, but also of substance abuse and suicide in those populations, right? So it's important that we close here because there's another aspect that compounds the impact, which is internet and social media engagement. They are augmenting or exacerbating those feelings of loneliness, right? And it's really important when we see that, especially in that at-risk group of people, uh, young college students or teenagers, they fall into that group of people. And Joanna DeAngelis, and I say this because it's quite an interesting way that she says that she calls uh, this the cruel specter from the landscape of fear. Wow. Thank you, Joanna, for putting that in those terms, right? Loneliness is the cruel specter from the landscape of fear. And we can maybe think quickly about having gone through the impacts of social isolation 2020, 2022, right? The worst of the COVID 19 pandemic, and how many, in globally speaking, had to deal with those social isolation and really understand the impact of uncertainty, fear, anxiety, and it's really that period of time heightened the urgency for us to understand that sense of a spiritual bond as an antidote to that disconnection, this crisis, even that we all go through, right? We we are, all of us, we are biosocial beings. We have this physical and emotional body, and they're interdependent, and both scream for connection. And it's interesting because when we talk again theoretically aspects of loneliness, human relationships are the glue, the mechanism for our personal validations, right? And more than ever, we, the modern man of the 21st century, you and me, we live in a society that unfortunately have created many behavior disorders. And Joanna lists a couple of examples of those types of behaviors. We don't need to go into this, but just real quickly, what about those introverted of us or hypersensitive? And also, what about those that uh, don't have healthy social interactions at home, at work, and the, as we mentioned, the marginalized because of a certain subgroup. So it's important for us to understand loneliness as a real impact that can lead to such difficult experience when we are going through this, right? So the we're talking about grief, that can lead to isolation, that can lead to loneliness, that can lead to depression. And I wanted to just to speak a few minutes about solitude, right? And I mentioned Brene Brown, and who is she? Well, she is an American researcher and professor. She has written many books. She's a great storyteller, and she talks about solitude, and she says solitude is a place. It's a place we choose. Okay. Loneliness is a feeling. It's a feeling we often have when we think we should be with other people. This is Brene Brown's way to compartmentalize the difference between feeling lonely and being in a place of solitude. And I really, our Spiritist group is called Solitude, so it resonates quite well with me when we start to read so many authors from Leon Denis, Allan Kardec, and Brene Brown in this case, how they add to a lot of what Joanna de Angelis talks about the subject. But it's important to understand those words from Brene Brown, right? Because she has done I believe that's where she's most well known for her work on empathy, right? So when we talk about loneliness, feeling, solitude, the place, it's important for us to think in those terms as they relate to the pain we go through grief. And Joanna de Angelis, she has a lot to say about solitude. And she mentions, right, she recommends that in those moments of solitude, one should, this is Joanna de Angelis' words here, one should seek the company of oneself to understand and heal the inner wounds. And so Joanna emphasizes that importance that we should all consider using, which is referencing or welcoming solitude as an opportunity for our self healing through introspection. We have a few more minutes. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between loneliness and solitude beyond the words of Brene Brown, right? Because understanding those a little deeper will help us address, on one hand, remember the project Unlonely talks about the negative aspects of in our health of being lonely, but we can address those negative aspects of loneliness while we are open to embrace those positive aspects. Thank you, Joanna, in this case of solitude for our personal growth, our personal mental, emotional well being, right? So, first thing is when we start studying about what is loneliness versus solitude, many times you see they're used interchangeably, but they do have a little differentiation here, right? The actual implication. So if we break down what is loneliness, yes, Brene Brown says it is a feeling, but this is dictionary definition. Loneliness is a state of mind where one feels isolated, feeling, right? Feels isolated, feels disconnected, feels unwanted. And when we go through that, and that's where that definition goes hand in hand with the process of grieving, when we are feeling loneliness, we are often feeling a deep sense of emptiness and sadness. And the other aspect of the definition, dictionary definition of loneliness, is that it can actually occur when you are surrounded by people, right? We are in the middle of a crowd, and it doesn't matter. We feel loneliness, especially if those around you don't understand you. They don't really are able to really welcome you, love you, recognize your pain, right? And the emotional impact of that loneliness is those easy for us to understand feelings of depression, but also anxiety and low self-esteem, and it's, as the Project Lonely mentioned to us, it can lead to physical impacts that are negative, such as heart disease and a weakened immune response. In from a social aspect, loneliness now is, results when we just are unable temporarily during grief to develop, to foster, to maintain, to sustain meaningful social connections or relationships, right? Bereavement, grieving, um, I mentioned pandemic, right, which we were all forced into a social isolation during that health crisis. But it can be a loss of someone through death. It could be a loss of someone because that relationship may be divorce, maybe just a breakup of my boyfriend of one day or 10 years. It does not matter when we no longer feel that we are that connected, that the sense of belonging is at risk, right? And interesting enough that it's our timeline that loneliness can go one day, 1 year, right? I remember, interesting enough, how uh, my dad, when we lost our mom, this is several years ago, how he went through that place of darkness and grieving, where anyone around him that would take a photo, it impacted him negatively because he associated photos of family as time to get together to be happy, and he was not happy. He was dealing with that absence, that lack of his loved one, and in my case, my mom, right? And he could not listen to music. He could not turn on the lights. So you start to see how, for that 12 months that he lived through his own grieving period, he needed that, and everyone respected that. And little by little, he was able then to turn on the light, to start to listen to music, to welcome folks together to celebrate. So there is a time is amazing because it will allow us to heal at our own place, our own time. But we're talking here about the difference between loneliness and solitude. I did not forget when we talk about solitude, this is again definition, classic definition. It is, Brene Brown calls it a place, but the definition is that is a state of being alone, but not feeling lonely, right? It is a place because it is often chosen. And those moments, as Joanna DeAndres I mentioned previously, she recognized that it can be quite positive and actually enriching experience. So solitude is about having time to oneself, to reflect, to meditate, to create, to recharge, and regarding our moments of grieving for the loss of a loved one, solitude, if we are able to get to that place of solitude, we are able to then allow our soul, our psyche, our internal definition within my role, within the context, within that familial landscape of emotional landscape of my family. I can reconnect, make new connections, and get ready for it. The the emotional impact of solitude is actually quite interesting, because in those moments we feel peace, we feel clarity, actually even energy. We are rejuvenated when we are in solitude. It is necessary, as we go through that, as a component of self-care and those personal growth moments. So why is that? Because in those moments of quiet, not of rejection, but quiet, where I can look at myself, right? Or I can reflect and meditate upon this new state of my life. It can also enhance my um sense of self, my creativity, my even problem solving, and overall well being. And interesting enough, solitude is typically, right, generally speaking, a voluntary aspect of our lives, and when it's embraced well, it is a time for incredible growth in terms of personal reflection. And it, even though it is a place that we go to be alone in connection with ourselves, it does not imply that you don't have those social connections. But it's that time that connections are there, but I allow myself to connect more deeply with me, with myself. So it allows us this introspection, and it allows a place and time for us to connect with our inner values. And from that perspective, it's quite valuable moments of solitude. It is quite valuable because it actually contributes to mental and emotional health. So Huh. As we come to an end to this, there are some key differences between the resulting loneliness and or that the moment of solitude from grief. Solitude is a choice. Loneliness is a defense mechanism, but it could be, especially if I am a group of marginalized group, like the elderly, or I don't know, recent going to college as a young adult, and it's a new environment. It may be an unwanted condition, right? So let's think about it, because solitude is that place that we go to that is positive. It is actually fulfilling and will help us, because when we are aware that, through grief, that our loved one really is with us all the time, and that our connection with them never ceases, then we have that sense that we are never truly alone, that we do have a sense of belonging. And yet, day to day, the routine of day to day relationships, depending on what you're going through, may change, and sometimes may change dramatically, but we continue loving one another. right? Maya Angelou, just to remind us that I love her and her poems. She used to say that music was my refuge because as she was seeking about solitude, she said I could crawl into the space between the notes and curl my back to loneliness. Quite interesting. And Joanna DeAngelis, just to wrap up, addresses solitude as this tool, as I said before, right? It is a mechanism, it is a psychological and spiritual tool for self discovery, for inner growth. So it is important when we started saying, when we're going through grief, we we don't have as much energy. Uh, it is actually a necessary investment of time and energy so that in the moment of shifting our how our sense of self in a group, but how can we always continue to grow? And by growing, we're talking about Joanna DeAngelis, we're talking about how can we expand our consciousness. So uh, just to finalize, Joanna DeAngelis, she suggests that feelings of loneliness can be a signal to all of us to indeed, I'm feeling lonely, right? I need to seek a greater spiritual connection, right? Whereas that experience of solitude is indeed and I'm trying to think her quote, right? She would say, the experience of solitude can lead to profound spiritual insights and a stronger connection with the divine. Goes back to what we heard from Leon Denis early in our talk today. So when we talk about Maya Angelou, we talk about Brene Brown, we talk about Andrea Louise and Leon Denis and Joanna DeAngelis, we start to see they all are bringing to us with different quotes and different books and different references a um they're bringing to us, they're underscoring to us the spiritual benefits that can indeed, that should be resulted from those periods of solitude. And so Joanna DeAngelis does encourage all of us to view grieving, loneliness, and solitude, not as a negative moment of our lives, but those great, great opportunities for our connections and spiritual growth. So just to close in here, how do we go from pain to maturity? And when we talk about maturity, we're talking about spiritual maturity, psychological maturity, right? We can think about when Jesus, which is our, the ultimate psychotherapist, suggested love one's neighbor to the extent one loves oneself. And he followed that saying by love for God as the most important achievement for humanity. He was appealing to all of us to love, to value, to know ourselves as a form of reaching the plenitude according to who we are, when we are, and for what the why are we here to contribute, right? So from that perspective, I just want to say, as in closing, as we grow through those moments of pain to that sense of welcome home, right? I'm okay. uh, Let us never forget we are immortal souls, and we will keep on growing, we will advance. And this is just we are subject, all of us, to the divine laws. And in the face of laws, grief teaches something so important. It teaches detachment without breaking the bonds of love. For those feelings of affection will survive death and will continue beyond his or her body and our own body. And let us just to close today thinking loneliness invites the soul to self encounter. It calls us to recognize all that we have, right? What are resources in solitude, especially when we live through and we go to that place of solitude with faith, with trust, we can find a really sacred space for our spiritual renewal, right? And in that, let us never forget those tools, prayer, intuition, right? Let those moments really help us realign, if needed, to our the divine within, our connection with the higher self. So let us never forget pain is not here to destroy us, but to really reveal who we still need to become, right? And we're here on a path for our spiritual evolution. So when we welcome pain with faith, confidence, and trust in the lessons of Spiritism, the lessons of immortality, of the Spirit, and the confidence of God's divine justice, all that we go through, that suffering that is so real, is indeed transformed into inner presence, faith in the future, and I would say conscious love, a love that will free us, it will heal us, and indeed enlighten us. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to be here. And I think, Yuri, you are here. Hi. Hi back, Yuri.
Hello, Marcia. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. I think you approached the subject in a very delicate yet profound way. I liked how you brought different authors, even those that are not necessarily from Spiritism, and gave us a lot of practical tools. I really appreciate the talk today. It was very, very profound.
Thank
Would
you.
you would you like to maybe do a prayer or some final words for our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, let us do that, and maybe we can all just lift our thoughts, our hearts to God, and God, who is the sovereign intelligence, supreme justice, God, our Father, that governs all life with wisdom and love. May we all remember that we are immortal spirits and we are temporarily here because we need to learn and we need to grow. So, moments of grief, this is so important for us to trust that love is never lost. And those that have departed will remain united to us all. Thank you so much. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. So be it, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a great one.